The Invincible Teams podcast is powered by Evergreen. Evergreen provides teamwork, training, and consulting to help your team thrive in every season. If you want to have a team that makes other leaders jealous, get started by going to their website in the show notes and scheduling your free consultation today. Welcome to Invincible Teams, a podcast for team leaders and business owners who are tired of dealing with drama and politics, high turnover, and teams not meeting their potential. We know that team leaders and business owners like you are pretty much always under pressure to get the most out of your teams. And we believe that every team should reach their potential, and that if we get intentional, our teams can become invincible. Welcome back to Invincible Teams. I'm your host, Ryan Mayfield. Today, we're talking about story. And here's why it's so important. No one understands the world around them without a story. The stories we believe are the lenses through which we all interpret the world. As a business owner or team leader, you have to understand that everyone who works for you is living out a story day after day. Every one of your customers is living in a story that is influenced by other stories. Stories have the power to unify people and to energize people. Entire failing companies have been completely turned around by telling the right story, and vice versa. Good companies have failed because they told the wrong story. So today we're talking with author Lisa Cron. Lisa is obsessed with story, and she has a new book called Story or Die. In it, she explains the brain science behind why stories are so powerful and gives practical guidance on how you can create the right story for yourself, your family, your team, or your business. So here's my interview with Lisa Cron. Okay, Lisa Cron, welcome to Invincible Teams. How are you?
I am doing just fine. How about you?
I'm doing okay. I'm in the middle of my day right now, and going good and excited to be chatting with you. So I appreciate you being here.
My utter and complete pleasure.
Well, for those that are listening, why don't you introduce yourself, tell us who you are and what it is that you do.
Okay. My name is Lisa Cron, and I work with story itself, not types of story, not storytelling, but story, what it is, why we're wired for it, how we respond to it. Literally what a story is, because most people do not know what most people think a story is, believe it or not, is wrong. So what I do is I work at the moment with writers. I work with screenwriters, I work with novelists, I work with memoirists, helping them as a story coach, not a writing coach, because it's not about writing. And again, I'm very big at busting myths. So any type of writing you're doing, it's not about writing, it's about the story that you're conveying and diving down into that. So that's what I do now, along with teaching. And back in the day when we could actually go somewhere, although you're speaking now, everything is like this through Zoom. And but with my latest book, the one that's about to come out, Story or Die, I'm hoping to kind of leap into another arena, which is the arena of story in the world, because story really is how we make sense of everything. It's how we're wired to make sense of everything. The way that we've been taught as to how we make sense of everything and how we weigh evidence and how we make decisions is just wrong. It's just literally, and it's not wrong like my opinion it's wrong, or theory it's wrong. It's biologically wrong. It's just not how we decide things. We decide things via story, via narrative. And given how contentious, shall we say, how divided the world seems to be at this moment.
I hadn't noticed.
Yeah, exactly. What are you talking about? It really felt like the right time to kind of come out and go, okay, this is really how to communicate. This is really how, if you have a point you want to get across, I think no matter what side of the divide that you're on, we're all sitting here thinking like, how could those other people get it so wrong? It's like, right. How can they be so wrong-headed? And obviously, I think the other thing we sort of all know at this point is explaining it to them with facts isn't going to work. In fact, it's probably just going to make them madder. So the question is, well, how do you communicate? How do you figure out how to, get your point across and hopefully to get people to see what you want them to see, whether it's, something political or literally, buy my new wonderful brand of peanut butter, whatever that would be. How do you convince somebody to do something they're not already doing? And for me, the underlying part, the part that really is as important, it is as important, is the practical art, the art of practical empathy, because you have to be able to empathize with somebody before you can change their mind about anything, before you can create a story that's going to change their mind about anything. And I think the problem that we have in the world in general and in the business world is thinking, okay, I want to convince you to do something, so I'm going to look at why I think you object, and then I'm going to tell you why you're wrong. I'm going to overcome that objection. And really often, first of all, we're wrong about why they're objecting. And most importantly, we're wrong about the meaning they're reading into that choice that they're making, and what we're actually asking them to give up by asking them to look at it differently. And by being able to empathize, which doesn't just mean, it isn't just empathy like I understand intellectually why you're doing what you're doing, but it's I can feel the meaning of it. I can feel that meaning, and understanding that I know what it is I need to question. I know what I call it is. I know what that misbelief is. I know what you're misreading here and why. And so I'm going to create a story that will help you see that, and at the same time show you the reward that you're going to get by making whatever change it is that I'm suggesting that you make. And the reward is never, well, rarely anyway. I mean, part of it might be you'll make more money, but it's also that you're going to feel better about yourself and who you are. And that's how we change minds. And it all comes back to story meaning, both the stories that we tell, again, which I think are very different. What a story is and what we think it is are two completely different things. But also, when I say we make sense of everything through story, I mean, we all have our personal narrative that we use to read meaning into the facts that we get, which is why facts don't work. You give someone a fact and you think it has a particular meaning, and there's no such thing as objective on that level. I mean, out there might be, but we are all going to read subjective meaning into it, again, not because there's something wrong with us or we're stupid or we're stubborn, but because life has taught us that that's what those things mean. So anyway, that's sort of an overview, and I'm hoping to be able to take some of that out into the world, because I mean, not only will it help people tell more effective stories, but it will help people connect better, because we so need to be able to connect with each other and not just completely, vilify the other side, which it feels like at the moment. Well, I mean, it's scary to think it could get worse. I suppose it always could, but right now it feels like a very critical point. So, the last thing I'll say is, I mean, the world is very different than it was literally just 2 years ago when I decided to write this book. So it feels like I'm so glad I did it, because, it's coming out, I think, at the, at a pivotal moment. Right.
Well, just the concept of story and the power of story is intriguing to me. This is something that I actually think about fairly often, and in terms of business, so I do a lot of coaching and consulting with teams. And even this morning, I was talking to a team about story and about their mission as a team, but then also just with, my own personal life and family, and what story are you trying to tell, and how do you make sense of all that? And then what you're saying, kind of the interpretive lens, right, through which everybody looks at things. And if you don't understand that, then it's really hard to understand the people around you, the world around you, and what you're saying to connect with other people. Right. And so I love that. I think it's an intriguing concept, and I want to talk more about the book in a minute, but I want you to share a little bit more, like when you say that you work with story and you work with other people with story, what are some of the types of people that you work with? What are some of the arenas that you get to work with story within?
I mean, right now, at this moment, like I said, I'm hoping to make a leap into not quote unquote writers, because right now the arena that I'm working primarily in is, as I said, with people who are writing novels, people who are writing personal essays, people who are writing memoirs, people who are writing screenplays, people who are writing, looking to create, television series, documentaries, that sort of thing. But all of it, again, breaks down to the exact same thing that you're doing, whether it's in business or whether it's in the political arena or whether it's in the nonprofit arena, or the notion of whatever one's one's passion that one is volunteering for, issues that people are involved in. It is the exact same thing, because what we come to story for, what we listen for in stories, and again, and I mean, just if I could just back up for 1 second, we've sort of been taught that story is something that is for entertainment, right? Let me tell you a story. It sounds like I'm going to read you a book, you're going to watch a movie, it's something that is there that's sort of auxiliary. And the truth is, story is hardwired into our brain. We literally make sense of everything through story. It's like I said, it's hardwired into our brain. Story's the language of the brain. So that when we're lost in a story, when the story's pulling us in, and this is true of, when you're reading or watching, but when someone's telling you a story, when it's when you're telling someone your mission statement, when you're writing your mission statement, we're being pulled in, and what we're looking for isn't what happened, what's it about. That's the big mistake that people make about story. They think it's about the thing that happens. They think it's about the plot. They think it's about, in business, the external change that you want someone to make. And that is not what story's about. Story's about why. Why is that person doing it? Why would that matter to you? That's what we come for. I often think of story as a difference between what we say out loud and what we're really thinking when we say it, because how often are those two things the same? And which one, is more revealing? Which one is more interesting? And which one is juicier? And it's always what the person's really thinking, that why. And again, it goes down to, if you've got an audience and you want to change what they're doing, if you don't understand why they're doing what they're doing to begin with, their view of why, not yours, because that's the mistake that we come into with. We think we know why, and we think they see the same world we do, so we're giving them reasons that would work for us. And it completely blinds us to the fact that they have completely different reasons for why they're doing it. And frankly, they don't care why you're doing it. They don't care about you at all. They care about, how is this going to affect me given my agenda? So when I'm working with writers now, and we're talking about either a fictional character that they've created, or if it's memoir them, it's always, but well, why is that character doing that? What is the real meaning that they're reading into it, and where did that come from? And this, again, talking about the practical art of empathy, it always comes from our past. The lens that we use to make sense of things isn't something that we got out of a book, or that we were born with a priori, even though we tend to think that's true. In other words, we think that everybody sees the same world we do. I literally, for this book, just finished reading a book by, I can't remember his name, a neuroscientist here in LA. And it was literally called Your Brain is a Time Machine. And it's premised on the fact, which you'll find in all sorts of other literature out there, is that, the sole purpose of your brain is to record past memories in order to predict the future, because that's what we're doing every minute of every day. When you're in a situation and you're not sure what to do, you're thinking, okay, well, given my agenda, what I want, and given what my choices are, what am I going to do that's going to help me achieve that? And we look to our past to figure that out. And that's where meaning comes from. Meaning comes from, by definition, our past. And so each one of us, sadly, as we can see now, I used to say, when you look at facts, and now it's like, whatever that is, because we can't even seem to agree on facts. But imagine that there is one that we can agree on. People are reading diametrically opposed meanings into those facts, and those meanings are based on what they learned when they were kids. But the important thing to think of is that they didn't learn it and decide it. They learned it when they were very, very, very young, and they thought, well, that is just the way the world is. So that now that they're looking at it that way, they don't think, well, this is what I believe. They think this is what smart people anyway, right? Those people are idiots over there, and we'll explain it to them, and then they're going to, come back over here to real reality and get it. And it doesn't work that way for anybody. And I guess if I could say the one other thing about what pulls us in and what we're looking for in any story that we hear, and now talking about literally spoken stories. There was a great study that was done by a neuroscientist, I think his name is Stephen Brown, out of McMaster University. And he wanted to see, like, when you're pulled into a story, what area of your brain lights up? Like, what are you looking for? And he thought it was going to be what Aristotle said, which is, plot first, character second. In other words, like, if you're thinking of a story or your mission statement, it's like, okay, but what's happening out there? Like, what's at stake in the real world, objectively, dramatically? And it would be that first and character second. So he, put people, and he did whatever it is you do to put them in an fMRI machine. And he read them again. We're not talking about, he didn't have them like read a novel or watch a movie. He literally just read them headlines, and they were things like, and these actually came from the study, it was things like surgeon finds scissors in patient, or fisherman saves boy from freezing lake, things like that. And he thought it would be okay, what's happening? That's what's going to light up. And that's not what happened. What happened was the area of your brain that mentalizes is what lit up. And that means what mentalize means is they went to, whose story is this? And what do they want? What are they afraid of? What's their motive? In other words, we immediately go to, who is the person and why is this going to affect them? Why does this matter to them? And not just on he doesn't want to fall into the lake and because he'd freeze and die, because that's generic, but specifically to that person. That's what we come for. That's what story is. Again, it's not about what happens or what someone does. It's about why. And when you're creating a story in business or to convince anybody of anything, it's going in and figuring out for your target audience the real reason why they're not already doing what it is that you want them to do. And then finding what I call their misbelief. What are they getting wrong about that in their language, in terms of how they see it? And then how can you create a story that will show them what that misbelief is, so they on their own are going to go, oh, wow, yeah, this is what's been holding me back. And here's what's true, because if I embrace what's true, I'm going to feel like my most authentic self. And I know that sounds so hackneyed right now. I hate using that expression, most authentic self, but it really does come down to how I'm going to feel about myself and what I'm going to do. And that's how they're going to, hear your call to action. But it means you have created everything based on what it would mean to them rather than what it means to you, which is, a big trap that we fall into.
Right. Well, you already took several of the questions that I had as you were talking. You've already answered a lot of those. I was going to ask about empathy. I mean, because you've mentioned that several times here. And so when you are trying to craft a story for whatever reason, if it's for personal reasons, for marketing, for your own internal stuff inside business, or writing a story in general, like you're talking about, how do you find that empathetic point for your audience rather than just writing from your own experience?
I think that comes into really zeroing in on who your target audience is. I mean, first of all, it's really, really doing research and finding out who are they. And I think the key thing, one of the big mistakes it's easy to make is to go, well, my audience is everybody. And it's like, your audience is, even if your audience is everybody. Like, in other words, if you were trying to combat climate change and your audience is everybody, but each person, each group of that, to use a word that, to use a word that just is true. It's been true from time immemorial, because the truth is we're wired to live in a world we don't live in anymore. That's, I think, a big part of the problems that we have right now is we're literally wired to live in very small, and here's the word, tribes. And our tribe is where we get meaning from. In other words, and the reason for that, if I could digress just for kind of 1 second, if that would be okay, because the reason, and just to hit on that, we're wired to live in a world we don't live in anymore. We're wired to live in, what's it? Dunbar's number is 150. Like, there's not more than that in terms of who we have to think about, what we have to do. And back in the day, about 100,000 years ago, when our brain had its last big growth spurt, and for a long time, what you were taught, what I was taught when we were kids was, evolutionary biologists thought that was when we got, and it's true, it is when we got the ability to think analytically. And they thought, okay, that's why, because we needed to be able to think analytically, and that's how we were able to leap the food chain, which we did. And now what they know is that's not why. The why was because by that time, we've we had rudimentarily, we were able to sort of, take care of ourselves. We weren't going to walk off a cliff. We knew to run from a lion. We could get food. But if we were going to do what we have since done, which is, let's face it, take over the world, we needed to learn how to do that thing that they've been telling us to do since kindergarten, which is to work well with others. And what they know now is that growth spurt was when our need to be part of a group was hardwired. And that is such a key thing. Our need to be part of a group is just as biologically driven as is our need for food, air, and water. And that's when people go, no, I'm a lone wolf. I always want to go, well, you do understand, don't you, that wolves travel in packs. And if you look up literally like what a lone wolf is a wolf that has been so damaging to the pack that it's been ostracized and it left. We are all people who need other people. But the problem is we're wired to live in a world where the tribes were very isolated and where if you did do something, that went against the tribe, if you lied, if you made a promise you didn't keep, everybody was going to know. And the promises that you made, to call them promises, had to do with keeping everybody alive because we all had to do our part or the tribe was going to die. So basically you were always going to be held accountable for what you did. And now there's no accountability anymore. Like there isn't. But we're still wired to live in that world and to think of that, at that point. So right now when it comes to telling a story that's going to change someone's mind. And if you're thinking, well, everybody, if we started with this, like, okay, climate change, okay, everybody needs to, but people are going to be in their own tribes and they're going to hear that differently. So you would need literally a different message for each tribe. And that would be going into what matters to them and doing enough research to find out, well, what matters to them and how can you get them to do what they need to do to solve this big problem. Let me give you a very quick example. There was a study done, I think it was 2012, and it was to see what would make conservatives, people who were very like anti, there's no such thing as climate change, and they did not want to be seen as tree huggers, like no matter what. And how can you get them to buy, energy efficient light bulbs? And what they discovered was if you took energy efficient light bulbs and you said, this is going to help you save money. You will save X amount of dollars to do it if you buy them. That worked. If you took even that same messaging, but you put this is green sticker on it, they wouldn't buy it. Because to them it said, people are going to think you're a tree hugger and that is not my tribe and I don't want to be part of that tribe.
Right.
So in other words, you really had to see what mattered to this group and how can you tailor what you're doing so that it is what they are going to be able to hear and feel like you're part of their tribe. That's why, if I could just say one thing that bugs me, if you don't mind, I know I'm going on and on and on, so tell me to shut up at any point. But
you're fine.
It really bothers me when people like, and this is going to get, I promise not to get political personally, but like when Mitt Romney came out and he said, he's against, he's going to vote for impeachment. And the left leapt on him. How dare you do that? And I kept thinking, shut up. Don't you understand that when you've got a group that is very self-defining and feels very strongly about something, the only way they're going to listen to the other side is if somebody who they respect and who they really feel is part of their tribe has gone in and gone, no, I know what you're saying, but look at it this way. That's who they're going to respect. So it's like, no, don't say that, because maybe he can change minds in a way that, who's very strongly on the left, not only won't you change anybody's mind, but you might end up with what they call the boomerang effect, which is if you're going to come in and give someone, hard and fast facts, why they shouldn't believe what they believe, not only are they going to go, wow, yeah, you might have a point, they're going to think of new counter arguments. Right. So it's going to, take you just as far in the wrong direction as you're thinking it's going to take you in the right. Again, it comes back to having empathy. It comes back to understanding that people don't believe what they believe because they're stupid or angry or, or there's something wrong with them. It's because this is what life has taught them is true. And they believe it on a biological level. It's not what we would call intellectual. And this doesn't make it lesser than. It's been relegated to what they call their cognitive unconscious. And it comes out in how they feel about things. And that's the other thing that we get really, really wrong in the world. And that is the way that we look at emotion. And if you want me to, I can dive into that. I'll stop right now because I know I'm on this tangent, or I could just keep going like forever. So I will stop.
Well, let's come back to that in just a minute. I want to make a little bit of a transition here. I know you're not necessarily, camping out in the business world all the time, but I do know that this stuff about story has incredible implications for the people that would be listening to this podcast, business owners, team leaders, even as you're talking about people wanting to belong to something like a tribe. To me, that sounds a lot like a team. And so I know like your book, it's called Story or Die, and I really enjoyed getting to go through it. And I'm excited to go for a second read where I actually have more time to slowly digest everything. But one of my favorite parts of it was that pretty much every chapter comes with some sort of a case study about the power of story. And it's usually in the context of some sort of a business or a team. And so I'd love to hear from you just maybe one of your favorites of those case studies and why you think it's such a powerful testimony to story.
Okay, let's do, and we could do ones that don't work as well if you want to, because I have examples also of things that have failed tragically. The simplest one, well, let's do two. Let's do one that has to do with audience and really trying to figure out why your audience isn't already doing what you want them to do. And the case study that I put in the book for that is the case study that a lot of you might be familiar with because it's from actually decades ago, although the company still uses a tagline that they came up with as a result of this research, and that is Motel 6. And in, I can't remember exactly when it was, if it was the 90s or the 80s or somewhere, and they were just losing customers like right and left, and they were trying to figure out why people weren't staying at Motel 6 because it was the least expensive place to stay. And you'd think, like, as we're taught, I mean, one of the rules of economics was people don't go against their economic self-interest. And it's like, if that was true, everybody'd stay at Motel 6. Clearly, something else was going on. So they got together a focus group. And the interesting thing is, each of the people in the focus group had stayed at a Motel 6 within the past 6 months. They knew that going in. So they started asking questions like, if you're on the road and you're going to stay somewhere, like where do you like to stay? And nobody mentioned Motel 6, nobody. So they're thinking like, let's ask them again. So they reframed it and asked the question again. And again, nobody mentioned Motel, like not a single person. So now they're thinking, we've done something wrong. Is there something wrong with the research? We've got to rethink. They sort of asked a third time. And on the way out, as they were leaving, one person turned around and said, well, if it's late at night, and I've really got to pull in somewhere, I'll stay at a Motel 6 because then it gives me enough money that I can bring, that I can bring a present for my grandkids. And at that moment, they stopped and everybody had a similar story. And what they realized at that moment was that people were embarrassed to say that they'd stayed at Motel 6 because out there in the world, the perception was, if you stay at Motel 6, you're poor. It's like you also dumpster dive. It was clearly a sign of poverty. And that was something to be embarrassed about. And nobody wanted to be seen as somebody. And this one person, and it goes to, I'm just going to put a pin in that for 1 second and go, when you are creating a story, if it's for your team or if it's you're trying to convince someone to do something, whether it's business-wise or whatever, you have to be willing to be vulnerable. Because in the writing world, they go, I want my character to be likable. And you think, well, people think, well, I've got to be likable. And that means that I never make a mistake and I always know what I'm doing. And I'm always this kind, great, wonderful person. And we don't like people like that.
Right.
People who seem perfect are the very people we're thinking, those are the people you unfriended on Facebook. And you're also thinking, like, what if they really got going on down there in the basement, because nobody's that perfect.
Right.
What makes us likable is being relatable. And the thing that makes us relatable is being vulnerable. And that person at Motel who said that at the focus group was being vulnerable, because everybody else could have rolled their eyes and gone, oh my God, I can't believe you stay there. Now I know something about you. I'll wait for another elevator. You can go down in that one by yourself. But instead, it was the courage to say it that made everybody else go, yeah, me too. And it turned out they realized, okay. So it was about, the good thing about Motel 6 is you're being frugal. And there's a big difference between being cheap and being frugal, right? Nobody wants to be seen as being cheap. Everybody likes the idea of frugal because it means now you have money for what matters. And that's what turned that around. And then they brought in, because they wanted to kind of then get that sort of down home, unpretentious voice behind it. And they got Tom Bodett, where if you've ever heard his voice, I admit, I would do anything Tom Bodett ever told me to do. I love his voice so much. It's just like, he's got this voice where you think, no, let me sit down by the fire with you and tell me a story.
Yeah.
And they brought him in. At that point, he was I think he told stories on National Public Radio. He was not famous at that point. And they brought him in for his voice, and he literally ad-libbed the tagline that Motel 6 has had, from the beginning, which is, we'll leave the light on for you.
Right.
Which is so homey. It's like, I mean, you can't imagine. I probably shouldn't say this, but I'm going to anyway. You can't imagine them at Mar-a-Lago going, we'll leave the light on for you. I mean, it's like,
Sure.
It would be more of a different audience.
Right.
So that would be a point of really trying to figure out what it is that's keeping your audience from, and listening for what their misbelief is. And the misbelief there was, if I stay there and let people know, they're going to think I'm cheap. And now they went in and got a story that countered that and said, no, you're not cheap. You're actually saving money so you can bring that cute stuffed bunny to your cute grandkid, and people are really going to like you for it, as opposed to not. And then knowing that makes you want to pay it forward. And now it's not just that you've heard the call to action, but you want to disabuse other people of that, the notion that it makes you seem cheap. So they take it out and they're going to trumpet it, out there to the world. And then just another quick example of just this notion of, when you've got a story and you think about, okay, what misbelief, as I call it, what is it that people think about using my product or believing this that is wrong, the misbelief that they've got deep down. So it usually isn't something necessarily factual, but it's something that they believe, and they believe for a reason. And a really simple example for that would be, and this was a few years ago, was a Subaru ad. And at that point, like Subaru, everybody kind of knew, like, they're not really pretty cars, but they're really safe. They were known, it's what's inside that counts, right? So they were known for safety, and they wanted to get that point across. So what they did was maybe you've seen this commercial. When I talk about it to people, they're, oh yeah, I saw that one. I totally admit I found it by searching online, like most effective commercials, and it came up. So I had not seen it at the time, but the misbelief that they started with was, and I'm sure you guys have all gone through this, you're driving down the freeway or whatever, and you see, that there's been an accident, and there's one of those like mangled cars where it's just like completely in pieces, and you go, oh my gosh, like those poor people, like nobody could survive that. And that was the misbelief that they wanted to deal with, which was, if you get in a really hairy accident, inherently you're a goner. And so they did something that talk about, the other thing about a story isn't with anything, it breaks an expectation, right? Like what we expect to see, and now we see something else. And the one thing that we don't expect to see in car commercials, like on purpose, is a mangled car, right? They don't want to sell you a car while you're thinking of, I could get in my car and not make it home or whatever. Right. But it opens with this completely mangled car, and the camera pulls back, and there's I can't remember if it's a cop or someone who's like staring at this scene. And then the tow truck driver comes up and he gives the cop a look of like empathy, like, oh my God, those poor people. And all the person says back is, they lived. And then that is repeated as the car gets towed to the junkyard. The same thing, the person bringing it in, someone looks, he says, they lived. And that is basically
Wow.
the entire commercial. It finally gets to the end and a family runs out and they go to the car and the dad says, we lived, thanks to our Subaru. And then they get in and they drive away in a new one. And that's it. I mean, it is as simple as that. It broke a misbelief that all of us had because, I mean, basically, not to get into the weeds of anything, but it often is a simple metric of what is the misbelief? What is the truth that's going to counter that misbelief? Once, not because you're telling them, but because they, meaning your target audience, has internalized that and seen, oh, wow, what realization do they then have? And then that's transformative. And that doesn't transform at first what they do, it transforms what they believe. And what they believe then transforms what they do. And that is the key secret of story. Story is not about changing someone's external behavior. Story is always about challenging an internal belief. It's about changing what somebody believes, no matter what it is, even if it's, my peanut butter is better than yours. It's about changing a belief.
Yeah.
And that's what the book dives into, because we're all making sense of everything via our personal narrative, the meaning we read into things. And for each one of us, it's different by definition because it's based on what our past experiences taught us.
Well, I think those examples are phenomenal. And, if you're listening to this right now and you are a business owner, a team leader, or just somebody that plays, a role on a team somewhere, I hope that you can already see a lot of the implications for story within, whatever your realm is, right? So whether it's in marketing and advertising or whether it's in HR, hiring. I talked with a company this morning about story before you and I even got on this podcast. And we were talking about in their hiring process, what story are they inviting people to be a part of, right?
Yeah.
With their team members, because that's going to determine whether or not their team members are engaged and given their best effort and having, high retention and job satisfaction, or if they're just going to phone it in every day. And you're of course going to pass that on to customers and things. And so there's a lot of application in the business world for just the idea of story, the power of story. One of the things though that I want to make sure and ask you about before we wrap up here is in the last chapter of your book, there was a quote that I really enjoyed, but I want you to talk more about it. And the quote was this: it said, "Those who don't learn to harness the story will fall victim to it." And so what do you mean by that? Talk a little bit more about that.
Sure. And what I mean by that is we are affected by stories every minute of every day, whether we know it or not, because it is literally biological. And when I say story, just to be really clear, I don't even mean, let me tell you a story about our company. Let me tell you a story about, I mean, literally when you understand someone else's narrative and the meaning that they're going to read into what you're talking about, a story can be 2 words. I mean, it's to break away from the notion of story 3 acts or what a novel is. It literally simply is the meaning that person is reading into what you're asking them to do or what you're saying. So when you don't understand that power, it is so easy to be swept up into it, because story mainlines meaning. Story doesn't come in through your brain and then you analyze what the person said and then it goes into your belief system. Story literally comes in through your, and if we have a minute to talk about emotion, but it comes in through emotion, how you feel about it. And then it's very easy to act and you don't even realize why you're doing it. If you understand that story has that power over you, it means that once you're pulled up in a story, and right now, I mean, as I think it's really easy to see when you look at some of the conspiracy theories out there that on the face of them make so absolutely, like literally, like no sense in the real world. If you haven't learned to go, okay, wait a minute, I'm feeling this way about it, but let me stop. And this does come down to conscious thought. Let me stop and look at it and ask some questions. The same way if you were creating a question, like how and why. Like, let me give you a quick example. And I guess this does get sort of political, but this notion that QAnon has that, Democrats and Hollywood elites have got this pedophile ring of all these children worldwide that they're selling, and they're eating or whatever. And okay, that's as I say to writers, like, you can say anything in a simple declarative sentence, but if you stop and you went down to the how and why, and you just even think, okay, if they've got this massive number of children that they're doing this to, where are the outraged parents? Why aren't there hordes of parents going, where are my kids? It's like, how could this be? If you don't learn to stop and ask questions, you will get pulled away. Because when it comes down to emotion, do we have a few minutes to dive into the way emotion works? I don't know if we're okay. So here's the point. Story and everything is driven by emotion. And the problem is we've been taught to vilify emotion. We've been taught that logic or reasoning, rationality and emotion are opposites, and they're going to fight with each other. And, when you want to make a decision, you're going to, keep emotion at bay because it's going to, weigh all the options and analyze it dispassionately, the cold light of objective reason. And if you keep emotion at bay, because otherwise it's going to come in and cloud your judgment. And the truth is that's a great model, and it makes us feel so secure. It makes us feel that like we're in charge, but it just completely isn't true. Every decision we make based on how we feel about it. Everything is, if there's nothing that happens to us that doesn't bring with it a chorus of emotion. When people go, don't be so emotional, calm down. I always want to go, are you aware that calm is an emotion? We're all, and what emotion is emotion is your body's way of instantly letting you know what something means to you. And once we believe something, it goes down into what's known as our cognitive unconscious. And the reason that we keep memories, what I said earlier, that the sole purpose of your brain is to record past memories in order to predict the future. The memories that we hold on to, we don't hold on to like, oh, this is so sweet, or isn't this wonderful? I can go down memory lane later. It's what our, amygdala and limbic system have decided this is something important. I need to remember this. And those emotion charged memories, emotion is there to literally let your conscious brain know, and your nervous system, that this is something that's going to help protect us in the future. I better remember this. And those memories they get like an evergreen backstage pass into your long-term memory. It's why, you can remember certain things vividly from when you were 6, but if you were just introduced to someone 2 minutes later, you can't remember their name.
Right. Yeah.
Because there was no reason to. And emotion is then what mainlines meaning. So when something happens, so your conscious brain doesn't have to go, well, let me think about what this is that way. It's just, oh, this is important to me. And sort of the last thing I'll say on this is also, and the reason that tribes matter so much is that when we're first trying to figure out the world as kids, and this is where we get our first, like, this is who I am and this is what the world is like. You may have heard of Abraham Maslow's, pyramid of needs. As American psychologist, the top is like, sense of purpose and connection. At the bottom, first thing we need, he says, is food, water, shelter, which is not true. The first thing we need is somebody who cares enough about us to give us those things. Because when you're a baby, you can't get them by yourself. So we're wired to take in and okay, how does the world work? What do I need to do in order to, and I don't mean it in a purely transactional way, but to get my needs met. And that's what literally becomes hardwired. And that need to belong to a tribe and what my tribe believes and needs for me to do becomes our sense of self. It becomes our identity, it becomes our comfort zone. And anything that challenges that, any fact that challenges it, it literally brings up within your body the same physiological reaction that you would have if somebody said to you, put up your dukes, I'm going to punch you. Because the feeling is again, back when we evolved, and the notion of emotional pain, as opposed to of being ostracized, of being left out, as opposed to the brain, creating new neural pathways, they just started to go down the same pathways as, if somebody did punch you in the nose. So that's why when you say to somebody, here's this other belief system, they don't think you're just giving them an objective fact and they have objective facts. They think that you said something like, what was it when we were little kids? They go, your mom wears army boots. It's like a personal affront, and they're ready to pummel you. That's why facts don't work, because it's bringing up a part of the brain that has nothing to do with making rational decisions, because guess what? We don't make rational decisions the way they told us that we do. It's just a false model is the point.
Right.
So I don't know if that answered the question.
No, that's great. Like I said, I think the whole topic of story is incredibly interesting, and especially when you start trying to apply it to all the different areas of life, whether that's business, whether it's personal, whatever it is, understanding it just brings a lot of clarity to why you do the things you do, why other
Yes.
people do the things that they do. And, as you said way back in the beginning of this conversation, that's where we can actually connect with people, because until we understand that, it's like we're speaking different languages. We might as well be, right?
Yes.
Um, and so I think it's incredibly powerful concept to be able to understand, regardless of, what you're doing with it, or where you're trying to apply it in life.
Yes, because it's human nature. It's literally, I mean, it's literally how we think. I mean, it's literally how we make sense of stuff. It's how we connect. It's not about what, it's about why, always. And the why is always subjective. There is no objective. I mean, when you think, I used to think this even as a little kid, like, if there's an objective reality, how could we even know it? Because we know everything through our own subjective lens. It's just literally impossible on that level. So having empathy for other people, unlike if you're in HR or you're interviewing someone, or, I mean, it really does come down to thinking about, why would this matter to them? What's important to them, and making them feel like they're part of it, so they can be honest with you, and you being vulnerable, so they don't have that feeling that we often have of, which is what we often think with everybody else, which is almost like, okay, what do they want me to be? I'm going to give them the thing that they want. What are they looking for? So I can pretend to be that, as opposed to feeling comfortable and feeling like, it's the difference between belonging and fitting in. You want someone in your organization who's going to belong. If somebody's trying to fit in, it means I'm going to see what you want, and I'm going to cut myself into that mold. It might not be who I really am, but I'll do what I need to do to fit in. And that never works, because then you've got that schism between who they really are and what they're trying to be. And that just doesn't work. It's always looking for the, why would it matter to this other person? What's important to them? And then finding the Venn diagram, where those things are going to overlap. Yeah. I mean, this is, again, if I could just say, when we talk about story, it is in everything. The way that you are making sense of things, the way that you are communicating with other people, the way you're thinking about yourself, it is in story. I mean, if we could just bust that model, I just hit my fist. I know you can't see that, but that was my hand hitting my fist. If we could bust the model of thinking a story is, okay, now let me tell you a story about, and then we're going into that. Certainly there is that, for sure. But that is not what, that is just a kind of story. It isn't story itself. Story itself is literally the meaning that we are bringing to things, and understanding the meaning that other people are bringing to things, and why they're doing what they're doing will help you see them, and almost always really, really empathize with them. Even if you don't like what they're doing. I mean, it still doesn't mean what they're doing is right, but it means you understand the why, and you realize they're not just doing it, to be a jerk, so to speak.
Right. Well, Lisa, I feel like I could probably have a conversation with you for several more hours, just around the whole idea of story and where we see it playing out. But I want to kind of wrap up with this, is just tell us about, you've got this book, Story or Die, and I would love for people to check it out. So give a little plug for that. Tell people where they can find you and connect with the rest of what you do.
Sure, absolutely. The new book, which comes out on March 2nd, although of course can be pre-ordered now everywhere. And the subtitle is, it's Story or Die, How to Use Brain Science to Engage, Persuade, and Change Minds in Business and in Life. And that really is what it is. And it breaks it down into three. There are three different sections of the book. The first really goes deeply into the brain science of how we make decisions and why, and everything we've been talking about here. But it literally really breaks it down, because story has been so thought of as a soft science, and it's not. So an emotion has been thought of something we need to keep out of things. And not only isn't it, but as I make a point in the book, if you couldn't feel emotion, you couldn't make a single rational decision. That's biology, not hyperbole or figurative. So it really breaks that down, so you can feel comfortable going, okay, yeah, story is so important. The next section is about how to find your target audience and how to really zero in on okay, why aren't they hearing what you want them to hear? Why aren't they already doing it? So you really can dive into that and figure out and then create a story that very well might counter their misbelief and end up having them come out. I hate saying it because it's not like brainwashing, but believing what you want them to, not, and this is the important thing, not because you told them to. They're going to hear your call to action, not because you said go do this, but because they want to, and then they become your champion. And literally that section goes step by step, breaking down how to create a story. And if I wanted to say anything about this book separate from the others, it is completely prescriptive. It's not like here's a whole bunch of theory, now go out and try to do it yourself. It's literally in all of this step by step by step. Right. So by the end, in fact, in that last part of the book, the last section, which is, how to create a story, really the hope is you are creating your own story chapter by chapter as well. And at the end of every chapter, there's a little do this. So it's completely prescriptive. And if you want to find me, my website is, it's the name of my first book, just wiredforstory.com. That is where I am. You can find me. You can connect with me. I have a newsletter that now just went out today, and I'm going to try to be doing it every week that also will talk about this book. And as I said, I'm just hoping to move into a new arena, not leaving the arena of writers, because I love writers so deeply and I love what I do. I'm on the phone probably, because I do it by phone or by Skype, probably 6 or 7 hours a day. You can tell I love to talk. But I'm hoping to branch out into more the business nonprofit, taking story into the real world that way. Because if there's ever a time for us to need to find consensus, it's now. So I'm hoping to be able to, help, in whatever way I can to do that.
Well, I think it's a great idea. And I think that you will likely find a lot of success there. Just the companies, whether they're for-profits, nonprofits, the ones that do well are the ones who are able to tell a compelling story that people can, like you said earlier, identify with, find themselves in. And so I think it's very needed. And for companies or teams out there who have a cause that's worthy, it would be a shame if that story wasn't told. And so I would just encourage you to check out the book Story or Die, to connect with Lisa if you think she might be able to be of service to you or have some interesting conversation there with her about that. And we'll put all the links to all that stuff in the show notes, and that way you can find it real easy. So Lisa, again, thanks for being on and having the conversation with me. Anything else as we kind of close it up here?
No, I think the only thing I would say is once you've mastered the power of story, use it wisely.
Well, thanks again for being on, and I do appreciate it. Thanks for listening today to the Invincible Teams podcast. Please consider giving us a rating and a review on whatever podcast platform you are currently using. If you think today's content might be useful for someone you know, please consider sharing it with them. Just a reminder that the Invincible Teams podcast is brought to you by Evergreen. Evergreen provides teamwork training and consulting to help you eliminate office drama and turnover and help you get the most out of your team. Thanks again for listening, and like we always say, we believe that every team should reach their potential, and that if we get intentional, our teams can become invincible. See you next time.